Hello, this is Chris Browder, and this is video 7.3 in my series on second language acquisition theory and research. In the last presentation, we learned about modified input and noticing. In this presentation, we will learn about the role of interaction in second language acquisition. This presentation is largely based on Chapter 7 from Ellis's text, Understanding Second Language Acquisition, Chapter 5 from Civil Trake's text, Introducing Second Language Acquisition, and Chapter 2 of Lightbone and Spada's text, How Languages Are Learned. The focus on interaction in SLA largely comes from the work of Michael Long. Long, like Krashen, believed that input was the key to second language acquisition. And Long was interested in understanding how input was made comprehensible during just natural, normal communicative interactions. Just, when people are talking to each other. So if one person is talking with a language learner, how they would make it so the language learner would understand. As Long looked at how people modified their speech for language learners, he noticed certain interactions that seemed to be making input comprehensible. He called these interactions negotiation of meaning. We refer to them as negotiation of meaning, not negotiation of form, because the focus is on the meaning. It's pure communication. Both the speaker and the listener are just simply trying to communicate, and in the act of communication, these things happen naturally. The following are some examples of negotiation of meaning I've taken from the Civil Trake text. So the first example, repetition. This is common and very simple. So let's say if a teacher is talking with a student who's not a native speaker of English, trying to learn, the teacher might say, "This is your assignment for tomorrow." The student would say, "What?" The teacher would say, "This is your assignment." Notice how the simple act of repetition allows the learner a second chance to listen to the word. This could lead to more comprehension. Also, notice how the speaker repeats the word more slowly and more clearly. The repetition isn't just repeating, it's speaking clearer and slower. Paraphrasing. Sometimes the person paraphrases the word for the learner instead of repeating it, like in the following example. So let's say if the teacher says, "This is your assignment for tomorrow," the student says, what? And the teacher says, "This is your homework." In this case, the paraphrase provided a simpler synonym for the word assignment. Hopefully, this might help the learner learn the word assignment. Maybe the learner already knows the word homework and can now connect it to assignment. Again, this new word assignment is basically the learner's I+1, and this person has made that I+1 comprehensible for the learner. Sometimes the learner struggles to form sentences but can't form them well. The other person can help with something called expansion. Now notice in this case, the learner is doing the talking, but this is still an output-driven view of language learning. An input view of language learning. But in this case, the output is the input. Well, that's confusing. So the student says hot, right? Because he's in that single word phrase of production, right? Student just says hot. And then the teacher says, "Yes, it's very hot today." In this case, the teacher provided the learner with the output he needed to produce, but didn't or couldn't. Essentially, the teacher is scaffolding the students in the Vygotskian sense, right? The learner is getting exactly the input that he's ready to learn, and then the input that he's getting the form that he's grasping for. Basically, he's grasping for something, and the teacher gives it to him. It's very relevant. Similarly, teachers sometimes complete sentences for students and provide words or forms that they lack. So in this example, the student is trying to explain something about trees and how you can tell their age. So the student says, for tell how old a tree is, you count. The teacher says rings. You count the tree rings. Again, notice the teacher is giving the learner exactly what she needs. Now, I'm keep on giving you examples. These come from Civil Trike. Keep on giving you examples with teachers and students, but it's important to realize that Long believed that these were happening just anytime two people are communicating. So it doesn't have to be with a teacher. Just anytime there's a sympathetic interlocutor with a language learner. In fact, it could even be two language learners together. This happens naturally as part of communication. So another example that Long found is what he called a frame for substitution. In this interaction, the speaker is providing a form that the learner immediately borrows. So when the teacher asks the question, "How old are you?" the student answers, "5 old are you?" So notice the student is immediately borrowing something from the input. Another example is what Long called vertical construction. In vertical construction, a person helps a learner construct a sentence piece by piece. So so it comes in many pieces. So if the student, like let's say a student in the classroom screams, "Taki!" Teacher says, "What? What did Taki do?" The student says, "Pencil." "What did Taki do with the pencil?" "Throw." "Taki, don't throw pencils." So notice how piece by piece this becomes a sentence that is not just any old input, it's comprehensible input, and it's exactly what the learner needs, exactly what the learner is looking for at that moment. Request for clarification. The teacher says, "Subtract and write the remainder here." The student says, "What is remainder?" Okay. And in this case, yeah, it's a focus on meaning, and it's just simply the student asking for clarification. These are things that happen all the time naturally when people are focused on meaning and communication. Okay. Long called this idea the interaction hypothesis. Okay, everything that we've gone through so far. Originally, the Long's interaction hypothesis argued only that negotiation of meaning facilitates second language acquisition by providing important I+1 input. Later, however, Long revised his theories to be more in line with Schmidt's noticing hypothesis. Long noticed that interaction also provided learners with important information about language, and he, like Schmidt, was starting to believe that learners were really actually consciously noticing these things, paying attention to these things, and aware of these things, and that might actually be facilitating some sort of deeper processing in the mind. So it wasn't just input, it was intake, processed input. So sometimes these interactions provide learners with positive evidence, and that would be models of what is correct or what communicates well. Sometimes it provides learners with negative evidence. That would be feedback on what is not correct and or what does not communicate well. So let's take the following interaction example. Student says, cigarette have cancer? And the teacher says, cigarettes cause cancer? In this case, the teacher is unsure of the meaning and is asking for clarification, but in the course of doing so is actually providing a model of correctness, or a model of what the student should have said. Now, once again, the assumption here is that the teacher is not trying to teach the students. The teacher is listening and trying to understand or communicate. Sometimes, however, the person talking to the language learner is actually doing a kind of error correction, but doesn't want to interrupt the conversation. When the interaction focuses on form, Long calls it negotiation of form. So when these interactions are form focused instead of purely meaning focused, we call them negotiation of form. And an example of that that he found was something he called recasting. So the student says, I go to Ocean City yesterday. And the teacher says, oh, you went to Ocean City? Did you like it? So this recasting is important because it's actually facilitating or enabling the communication. It's still focused on meaning, but it's a natural, non-intrusive kind of error correction. The result, hopefully, is that it's providing the learner with what the learner needs, what the learner is ready to learn, hopefully. The work of Michael Long was very influential in TESOL in the 1980s and 1990s. In fact, communicative language teaching is a whole teaching approach based largely around small group activities in which students complete tasks in which they have to interact with other students. And during this interaction, the students actually have this negotiation of meaning with one another. So students are learning from each other. We just talked about the role of interaction in second language acquisition. We learned that the interactionist position started out with researchers trying to understand how people naturally modified input for language learners during authentic communication. At first, interaction was just viewed as a great way to get comprehensible input, but now it is viewed as a way for learners to get actual information about the language, about what is correct and what is not correct. At first, it was assumed to be, a subconscious process. How would I say, in line with what Krashen was saying. But eventually people started to think it was more of a conscious process where the learners were actually paying attention to what was going on, actually attending to the form. So next we're going to talk about output. Thank you very much. I hope this was helpful. Bye-bye.